Look at this chaotic system of colliding nodes. This represents anarchy, a baseline human condition completely devoid of government and laws. In a purely physical reality, this translates to environments where mobs rule territory through fear, physical force, and violence. Under these conditions, long-term human objectives become impossible. You cannot plan for the future, pursue an education, or safely raise a family when your daily focus is mere survival. A modern state was engineered as a mechanical countermeasure to this chaos. Strictly defined, government is an institution through which a specific group of leaders exercises the power to make and enforce rules affecting the people under its control. Abraham Lincoln formulated a highly precise view of this dynamic. His functional philosophy was that a government exists to do for a community of people whatever they need to have done, but cannot accomplish for themselves in their separate individual capacities. The modern state is not an organic feature of human nature. It is an artificial survival mechanism built to protect human civilization from its own worst, most destructive instincts. This structural model shows the 4 mandatory functions any legitimate government must perform to prevent a collapse back into chaos. The first pillar is providing leadership. Officials set collective priorities. They decide what actions constitute a crime, what the penalty will be, and determine the exact tax burden required to fund these operations. The second pillar requires maintaining internal order. Since interpersonal conflict over property and personal boundaries is unavoidable, the state must provide courts and legal frameworks to resolve these disputes without physical violence. The third pillar focuses on providing public services. These are logistical necessities that individuals cannot realistically fund or build alone. Projects like municipal sewer systems, paved road networks, and public health initiatives like enforcing housing codes or inspecting meat supplies. The final pillar represents a dual mandate: national and economic security. On the national security front, the state protects its citizens from complex external threats, whether those are foreign armies, spy satellites, or international terrorist organizations. Economically, governments are required to protect domestic businesses, stimulate trade, and frequently intervene in foreign economies to maintain domestic stability. A primary historical example of this external economic intervention is the post-World War II Marshall Plan. The United States heavily funded the rebuilding of European infrastructure to prevent mass economic collapse, a vulnerability that U.S. leaders calculated would lead to swift communist overthrows across the continent. Whether a government operates as an autocracy or a democracy, these 4 structural requirements remain absolute. Fail to execute them, and the state fractures. In daily conversation, people frequently use the words nation, state, and country interchangeably. But in political science, these terms identify distinct concepts. This diagram illustrates the difference. A nation is a sociological concept. It refers to a large group of people who believe themselves united by common bonds of race, language, custom, or religion. For example, the Kurdish people consider themselves a nation unified by shared culture, yet they do not possess their own distinct political borders. The terms state and country, however, are strictly political. They define a community that occupies a definite territory and operates an organized government. The word state originates in ancient Greece. The philosopher Aristotle defined a state as a town and its surrounding area, specifically sized so citizens could communicate face-to-face to govern their affairs. But to function in the modern world, a state must possess one final, absolute requirement: sovereignty. Sovereignty is the supreme and absolute authority to make and enforce laws within territorial boundaries, without seeking approval from any external power. A functional state exists when supreme legal authority locks down a specific geography, moving beyond the shared identity of a cultural group. If humanity naturally exists in a scattered state of free anarchy, we have to ask how the first sovereign states actually formed, and how humans justified handing over this supreme power. Looking at this matrix of historical models, the first explanation is evolutionary theory. This suggests that early states organically grew from ancient family structures. As extended patriarchal families expanded into massive clans, they required rigid organization to survive. The second model is force theory. Under this framework, strong leaders used violence, or the direct threat of it, to force human cooperation. Populations were brought under centralized authority strictly through physical dominance, often to build defensive city walls to keep out enemies. The third explanation is the divine right theory. Particularly prominent among European monarchs in the 1600s and 1700s, this theory argued that a ruler's absolute authority came directly from God. This created an effective psychological control mechanism. Opposing the monarch constituted a secular crime against the state and a simultaneous sin against God. By the 1650s, a major philosophical shift occurred, producing the social contract theory. Over millennia, the rationale for centralized control evolved. It moved away from raw physical coercion and religious decrees, becoming a pragmatic, calculated transaction between human beings. In 1690, the English philosopher John Locke formalized this transactional model. His landmark publication became the definitive philosophical blueprint for modern democratic governance, strongly influencing the founding of the United States. Locke begins by defining humanity's original baseline, a state of perfect freedom. In this natural condition, individuals have liberty to order their actions and dispose of their possessions. Without structural protection, this liberty equals total vulnerability to violence. Locke argued the only valid catalyst for leaving this state of nature is individual consent. Individuals voluntarily surrender a portion of their natural liberty. In exchange, the newly formed state guarantees peaceable living and the secure enjoyment of their personal property. In Locke's framework, state authority is a negotiated trade, stripped of religious myth or biological inevitability. This raises the ultimate civic question: what happens legally when a sovereign stops protecting its people and breaches that contract? Locke provides the answer in his final chapter on the dissolution of government. He states that a government dissolves from within when a leader sets up their own arbitrary will in place of the laws. When personal whim replaces established laws, the contract is broken and immediately voided. The power given to the state reverts back to its original owners. Society regains the liberty to provide for itself by establishing a new legislative body. This legal justification served as the philosophical engine driving democratic revolutions. The state exists purely to cure the logistical disease of anarchy. It is structured entirely by human consent, and its sovereignty remains legitimate only as long as it honors the terms of the contract that brought it into existence.